Part 2, Journey to Sustainaville. Chapter 3, Sanctuary. Such places exist among the endless abodes of every major city, places that seem to be sanctuaries from the present, immune to the hustle and bustle, the sound and fury that in the end change nothing. Like long, unopened books sitting upon dusty shelves, there exist people filled with knowledge that has somehow been saved from extinction. But buried as they are by time, there abides in them yet a seed awaiting the proper condition for germination. There is some process that occurs in dormancy, some subtle shifting of the fabric of reality that science has yet to discover. From such forgotten places as these occasionally springs, in some unforeseen future, a gigantic oak whose day has come. James Rosoff, Seven Stones. As long as there is one upright man, as long as there is one compassionate woman, the contagion may spread, and the scene is not desolate. Hope is the thing that is left to us in a bad time. E.B. White, Letter to Mr. Nadeau, 1973. Every year, a virtual city springs up in the wilds of interior British Columbia. The citizens are festival-goers, artists, merchants, medical personnel, employees, and volunteers. At 15,000 people, it is larger than any municipality within hours of driving in either direction. It's called Shambhala, an electronic music festival now in its 21st year. As the city manager in a neighboring municipality, I worked with festival organizers as you would with any regular municipality to establish protocols in the case of an emergency, backup water supply, fire services support, and other such things. For an administrator, the complexity of the undertaking was impossible not to appreciate. Even though the festival is only 1 week long, there still must be water and sewer infrastructure, medical services, food services, waste management, facilities for bathing, security services, human resources, all on top of the logistics and creative challenges of putting on a good show. Overall, it was an impressive feat, but what really struck me on my first tour of the festival was an enclosed area, like a massive tree fort nestled in a grove of old-growth forests, with a big sign in front of it carved in wood, "The Sanctuary." It was not really part of the tour, but I just had to go in. The festival organizers were sophisticated in mass gatherings and had all of the medical facilities to deal with emergencies, as well as a special safe space for women. This place, however, was unique to that and open to all. It is described as a calm, safe haven nestled in a grove of old-growth trees right next to medical services. The sanctuary provides non-judgmental service and support and welcomes anyone who feels they need a safe, quiet place to rest at any time during the festival. If you are feeling stressed, overwhelmed, isolated, cold, wet, need to get out of the sun for a while, just need to chill out, or need someone to talk to, our sanctuary volunteers will be happy to help. Sanctuary is open 24 hours a day. I wanted to stay there for a while, a long while if possible. The tour guide in her woodland fairy-like costume could have waited all day, but my guests could not. So we moved on, but the value of establishing such spaces in communities everywhere has never left me. Refuge from the storm. It's interesting that the practice of offering sanctuary comes to us from medieval Europe. Perhaps there's a natural law that dictates that where there is great darkness, there must also be great light. Sanctuary was extended to keep even accused felons safe and fed for up to 40 days, often while mercy or pardon was sought or exile arranged. According to literary scholar and professor at the University of California, Elizabeth Allen, offering sanctuary in medieval England, which she studies, has a symbolic value that marked people's vulnerability and made protecting them a sacred duty, as well as a moral duty and legal obligation enshrined in both canon law, the law of the church, and secular common law. This is the same principle, namely the principle of equality expressed as all men are created equal and worthy before God, like a divine seed planted in the heart of humanity, that Tocqueville describes as the driving belief behind the Great Democratic Revolution. In his trip to the continent, he expressed scorn for the injustice of slavery and the extortion and dislocation of the Aboriginal peoples. These were examples that betrayed democracy and could threaten its very existence. Today, sanctuary is most commonly associated with offering support and protection for refugees whom the state seeks to deport. Some U.S. cities distinguish themselves as sanctuary cities or not sanctuary cities, depending on whether they will cooperate with federal immigration law enforcement officials. The Canadian Sanctuary Network supports the practice of providing sanctuary to refugees and describes this age-old practice as grounded in an affirmation of faith that human life is sacred and worthy of protection. During the Civil Rights Movement, some churches provided sanctuary for civil rights activists. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, on September 15, 1963, where 4 young girls were blown to pieces in the church basement by a bomb planted by the Ku Klux Klan, exposed the violence of racist hatred and shattered the sense that there was any place safe if you were a Black American citizen. From the Time magazine report on September 27, 1963, rescue workers found a 7-foot pyramid of bricks where once the girls' bathroom stood. On top was a child's white lace choir robe. A civil defense captain lifted the hem of the robe. "Oh my God," he cried, "don't look." Beneath lay the mangled body of a Negro girl. The remains of the 4 girls were covered with shrouds and carried out to waiting ambulances. A youth rushed forward, lifted a sheet, and wailed, "This is my sister. My God, she's dead." A Negro minister added his pleas. "Go home and pray for the men who did this evil deed," he said. "We must have love in our hearts for these men." But a Negro boy screamed, "We give love and we get this." Later, Negro youth began stoning passing white cars. The police ordered them to stop. One boy, Johnny Robinson, 16, ran, and a cop killed him with a blast of a buckshot. That made 5 dead and 17 injured in the bomb blast. Hatred, once unleashed, clearly knows no bounds. Had the ministers and leaders of the civil rights movement, who would be clearly justified in their hatred, not called for love in return for hate, many more would have been killed. The Tree of Life synagogue massacre in Pittsburgh, motivated by racist hatred towards Jews, happened on the Sabbath, October 27, 2018. They were gathered to worship as well as welcome a new baby boy into the world when the gunman opened fire, killing 11 people in the sanctuary. As this book goes to print, we remember what Canadian police describe as a barbaric massacre at a mosque in Quebec on Sunday, January 29, 2017, where people were gathered to pray. 6 people were killed and 3 times as many people were injured by the young gunman. Today, the places we can consider safe are growing smaller in number. The individualism, materialism, envy, and ill will that Tocqueville warned us of has its tentacles woven through our cultural fabric. Canadian author Paul Bourne, who describes community culture on a spectrum, warns of the rise of fear-based communities where some believe that we have a greater right to life and happiness than they do. We are stronger when they are weaker. We are right and they are wrong. If we work together, we can win and they will lose. These are the hallmarks of divided communities descending into animosity, incivility, and worse, and further away from any sense of social unity based on the well-being of all. Previously safe spaces like schools can no longer be assumed to be so. In July of 2018, the Canadian Teachers Federation released a Pan-Canadian Research Review survey results reporting that violence ranged from 41% to 90% among surveyed teachers in jurisdictions across Canada. And we're all too aware of the rise of deadly violence. In May of 2018, CNN reported that since 2009, there have been 288 shootings in U.S. schools, averaging 1 shooting a week in 2018 alone. The needs of at-risk populations, namely those with mental illness, sickness, addiction, homelessness, and poverty, for safe havens are daily and pressing. While there are many activists and politicians taking bold action in this area, they are too often met with oppositional rage and lack of compassion or concern. In some cases, even death threats arise for attempting to address this human problem in my neighborhood. The old adage, "my home is my sanctuary," is further away from realization than it has ever been before. Jane Jacobs states that families and households have been stretched so thin through relentless economic and social pressures that this vital social institution is strained to effectively serve its traditional nurturing function. Social media, video games, and general addiction to screen time has only further undermined family life. Addiction expert and author Dr. Gabor Mate writes in How to Build a Culture of Good Health that parents stressed by multi-generational trauma, relationship issues, economic insecurity, maternal depression, or social disconnection are simply unable to give their children the mutually responsive, attuned interactions that optimal childhood development requires. The result is the epidemic of developmental disorders among our children that we are now witnessing. On a societal level, we must understand that health is not an individual outcome but arises from social cohesion, community ties, and mutual support. We need a broad, attitudinal, and practical shift consciously willed and created toward a culture based on the fundamental sociality of human beings. We know all too well from data too persuasive and too somber to be disputed that emotional isolation kills. Recognizing this social need, psychotherapist Tracy Rubble started Sidewalk Talks, a community listening project, in San Francisco, California in 2015. According to Rubble, the program now has 1,000 volunteers in 29 U.S. cities and is active in 10 countries. Volunteers sit in chairs on sidewalks with an open chair before them and an invitation for anyone to sit down and talk. She says that it isn't a professional counseling service, they are simply offering human connection. Offering sanctuary is a revolutionary act. It expresses love when others offer scorn or hate. It recognizes humanity when others deny and seek to debase it. Sanctuary says we rather than I. It is belonging, the building block of community. Sanctuary offers hope that together we can expand that sanctuary to all. Night vision. There is no question that these are dark times. It sometimes takes the calmness and stillness of the night to sharpen our focus, reflect, and ultimately see more clearly the nature of the challenge before us, glimpses of the way forward, and our part in it. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. The Apostle Paul reminds us that it was God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," and in so doing made his light shine in our hearts. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. Perhaps these are the seeds of goodness that the secular author E.B. White describes as harbored in people, lain for a long time waiting to sprout when the conditions are right. In reality, the darkness has always been with us too. We have just been so busy vilifying whomever we perceive to be our enemy that we couldn't see it. The enemy could be women. It could be people of a different color. It could be your neighbor. It could be a person of a different political party or religion. It could be your boss or coworker. It could be orphans like in Lemony Snicket's The Vile Village. It could be anyone, for goodness sake. And it is this cultural and moral darkness that, if not lifted, this time by us all poses an existential threat as real as climate change. Because without addressing how we live together and finding a way that respects both nature and our universal humanity, we won't have the collective ability, strength, or shared vision necessary to protect our world or build a better one. A new study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology examined the psychological and social implications of holding a notion that everything that exists is part of some fundamental entity, substance, or process. As expected, they found that people do differ in the degree to which they believe in this oneness of all. Those who did, whether secular or religious, had greater compassion for people and held values that included a universal concern for the welfare of others. They also felt more connected to others without sacrificing their sense of personal identity. This indicates that the individualism versus collectivism narrative is a false dichotomy, that there is a healthy individuality, an independence of mind and thought that coexists well with concepts of social unity and collaborative action. This is important because self-interested individualism, the value championed above all others in our modern democracy, is precisely the habit of the heart that Tocqueville warned us could be the undoing of democracy. It is the door through which this dreaded tyranny comes in, namely, when citizens are satisfied that might is right, so long as it is in the majority. It is the tyranny that turns a blind eye to injustice, sometimes injustice to entire groups of people in our communities, such as the homeless, people of color, or women, because the majority declared it to be so. This is the my gang versus your gang divisiveness we see everywhere in politics today. Tocqueville considers the pursuit of self-interested individualism as misguided because the idea that any of us are truly self-sufficient ignores all of the compounded efforts of others who made and make our lives possible. It also has the potential to erode other important civic virtues like love of one's neighbor and selflessness in the service of others that make living well together possible.